guys. Kevin did kind of like a setup for me because I'm going to talk about all the stuff that's interrupting our flow, basically. And I want to start with a little audience survey, actually. So how many of you would say that you work really hard? Raise your hand if you feel like you work pretty hard. Right? Yeah. Not surprising. That's almost everyone, right? You guys are a bunch of ambitious overachievers who go to conferences and take notes. So I want to ask you a second question. So how many of you would say that you can feel totally comfortable continuing to work the way that you do now for the next 10 or even 20 years? How many of you feel like you can continue working at this pace? Okay, that's like 4 people. Okay, so everyone's hand goes up, we're all working hard, every hand goes down, we cannot sustain this, right? Because the way that we're working right now, almost all of us, I feel like, is completely unsustainable. So there's actually this national survey that happens every year that's called the General Social Survey, and it sort of takes the pulse of society and our well-being and our relationship to work, and it's been done for many, many years, since the late 70s. And this year, they found that 1 in 2 people said yes to the question, do you feel constantly exhausted from work? So 50% of people said they felt constantly exhausted from work, right? So you guys aren't alone, or soon you won't be alone. And that's up from, so when they first started doing the survey back in the 70s, only about 1 in 5 people said yes to that question. It was about 18% of people, right? So that's a crazy increase. And I feel that it's indicative of the fact that we're really kind of starting to move into, or maybe on the verge of, a kind of burnout epidemic. And that's because this is kind of the way that we work, right? Like some things change, the scenery changes, right? Like the lighting changes, but like you're still working, you're still on a computer, you're still in your smartphone, you're still connected, people are still asking you to do things, you're still responding, right? You still have a to-do list in your mind, right? Our sort of default state of existence is being overwhelmed and overstimulated and overscheduled, right? This is kind of what our lives look like, right? This looks familiar to you guys? Or if it's worse, maybe it looks something like this, which I feel a little bit like I'm going to have a nervous breakdown looking at that. But the good news is I'm working on an antidote. And I launched it a couple days ago. It's called Hurry Slowly. And it's a new podcast about pacing yourself. And it's about how we can actually be more productive and creative and resilient when we learn how to slow down, when we start to learn how to take our time. And I'm interviewing researchers and artists and entrepreneurs about how we can start to navigate work and life at a more sustainable pace. And one of the first interviews that I kicked off with this past week was with Jason Fried, who's the co-founder and CEO of Basecamp, a project management type of software that maybe some of you use. And we had this great conversation about kind of how to take a slow and steady approach to working in a world of interruptions and a world in which you're always overscheduled. And I want to play a little clip for you guys from that conversation where I think Jason really diagnoses this sort of burnout problem pretty concisely.
Basically, it comes down to whose schedule is everyone else on? And if everyone else is on everyone else's schedule, meaning when someone says something, you have to stop what you're doing to respond to them, or if someone can take your time by pulling off chunks of your calendar whenever they want, then if you don't have your own time, then you have no control over your day. When you have no control over your day, you end up working longer than you should.
And I think that Jason really hits the nail on the head there. We, in many ways, have sort of lost control of our time and kind of lost control of our days. And I think that we're really experiencing something that researchers call time scarcity on a daily basis. And that term comes from this book. It's actually called Scarcity, Why Having Too Little Means So Much. And it was written by these two economists, Melanathan and Shafir. And they decided to take a look at the sort of two things that we experience the most scarcity around and kind of look at why that happens. And so they analyzed time scarcity and money scarcity. So probably most of us in this room, you guys are at a conference, you probably have a decent paying job, and so probably most of us, somewhat blessed, only have one of these problems, which is time scarcity, which is what I'm going to focus on today. And when they really dug into scarcity and they really studied it, what they found was that it actually acts like a magnet. So when you have a shortage of something, like time in this case, it really concentrates your attention. It sort of exerts a sort of constant pull on your cognitive energy, and it creates what they call a scarcity trap. And so you kind of get pulled into this vicious cycle where when you don't have enough time to do your work, you can't stop thinking about how you don't have enough time to do your work, right? And so you become preoccupied with your lack of time, and that preoccupation starts to sort of bleed out into every area of your life. And I'm sure this is familiar to a lot of you, right? So you're like out with your friends for a drink, which looks exactly like this. And, in the back of your mind, you're thinking about this work deadline, and you're kind of like maybe beating yourself up a little bit because you maybe like wish you were sort of at work getting that done, right? Or you're, sitting in a meeting and, you're kind of half listening to someone, but you're kind of making a to-do list in your head, right, of all this other stuff that you need to get done. Or, you're walking your kid to school and you like take a glance at your phone beforehand, right? And you're thinking about all these emails that you have to respond to, right? And what happens is, and this is a quote from the book, because we're preoccupied by scarcity, because our minds constantly return to it again and again and again, we have less mind to give the rest of life. And so what happens when we're in that state, when we have less mind to give the rest of life, when we're constantly overscheduled? When they studied people, what they found was the impact was that when you're living in this constant state of time scarcity, you become less insightful, you become less controlled, and you become less forward-thinking. Right? Let's think about these abilities. That's basically, the ability to be focused and to be disciplined, the ability to be insightful, the ability to be forward-thinking, right? Those are the key ingredients in creativity, essentially, right? So we're actually sacrificing a lot. Essentially, time scarcity is like this kryptonite for our creativity. Okay, but the good news is there's actually a tool that most of you as designers use every day that I think we can use to start to solve this problem. So I'm going to give you guys a little hint. Does this give you any ideas? No? Okay. I'll give you some more clues. It's the difference between this and this. Or the difference between this and this. Or the difference between this and this. It's white space, right? Key component in any good design, right? And you guys are all designers, so you know that white space isn't blank space, right? It's not meaningless. It's negative space. It's intentional space. And it has a purpose, right? And that purpose is to throw something else into relief, right? To help people focus their attention on the thing that you want them to focus their attention on, right? It creates harmony throughout the whole design. It creates harmony, it creates balance throughout the whole design, right? Would you say that we can all kind of agree on this? This is what white space does? You can nod your head. Yes. Okay. So we all agree on this, right? What is this? What is this? When we design our days, this is what happens, right? Do you guys think this design is a little cluttered? Like, a little bit, maybe? Okay, so I want to advocate that we need to design white space into our daily schedules in the same way that you design it into a website, you design it into a poster, you design it into an app. And the reason that you need to do that is because when your schedule is cluttered, your thinking is cluttered, right? You don't have any time to reflect. When you're constantly kind of walking around, right, like in this zoomed in state, letting this little thing tell you what to do, right? It's like, go to a meeting now. answer an email now, okay, respond, oh, you got liked, great, right? And you're kind of constantly walking around like this, right? And we never zoom out. We're always rushing from one thing to the next. When you're always looking down at this little thing and kind of letting it tell you what to do, you never have time to reflect. You never have time to get some distance. And you really never have time to kind of figure out what something means, right? To kind of sit with it. And so white space creates time for reflection. It creates time for idleness and mind wandering. And you might be thinking, well, I'm really busy. Like, I don't have time for that, right? But these are actually really, really important activities because those moments of downtime are what kind of refuel your tanks and really supercharge your creativity. There's this guy that I interviewed for the podcast, Alex Pang, who wrote this really wonderful book called Rest, R-E-S-T, Why You Get More Done When You Work Less. And he told me that our brains, when they're quote unquote at rest, are only 5 to 10% less active than our brains are when we're doing a calculus problem. Or when you're trying to solve a hard design challenge, right? When it seems like you're doing nothing, there's actually a lot of really important work going on in your brain. It's just happening without your conscious effort. And what's happening in those moments of downtime when you think that you're doing nothing is that this whole other network of your brain gets activated. And it's called the default mode network. And whole different kind of sections of your brain that aren't normally connected when you're exerting conscious effort start to connect. And also what happens is the sort of critical capacity of your brain starts to quiet a little bit, right? That editing capacity, that part that's like, that's a stupid idea. That kind of calms down a little bit. And then your brain starts to sort of consolidate concepts and consolidate memories and start to make sense of things. And those are those moments when your brain will also start to sort of pick up and start to, in the background, kind of problem solve on maybe something that you were working at when you were sitting at your computer, a problem that you were chewing on. Your mind kind of starts to take up those problems and work on them in the background. And that's why it's so important for creative people like yourselves in particular, to have that downtime, to have that white space in your schedules, because when you kind of clear out that clutter, when you get that white space, when you let your mind wander a little bit, when you, God forbid, step away from your computer, what you're doing is you're making room for ideas, right? I didn't get the idea for this talk. I wasn't like sitting at my computer, right, at my desk, like, God, I gotta figure out this talk, I gotta figure out this talk, I gotta figure out this, right? Like, does that ever happen? Have you ever done that? Like, have you ever been sitting at your computer, like, I gotta figure this, and then just like, it comes, right? That never happens, right? Where it happens is I got the ideas for this talk, I was laying in bed, I was in the shower, I was walking around the park, right? That's when those aha moments come, because that's when that default mode network is getting activated. So it's really important to make sure you're giving it some room for that to happen, right? So maybe you're on board now, right? Great, I need white space. Like, what is that? What are you talking about? What does that even mean, right? I think of white space as this kind of Zamboni for the mind. And so for me, white space, when I say make time for it, it's kind of any activity that really helps you relax and kind of clear your mind. And I hope you guys are appreciating just like the design of the Zamboni machine. Like, there were uglier videos of Zamboni machines that I could have picked, but this is like a beautiful Zamboni machine. Anyway, I actually feel like for me, watching this video is like a white space activity. Like, I find it very calming. But a couple ways, just like, different ideas for things you could do. Could be sitting quietly, could be taking a walk, could be working out, could be free drawing, automatic drawing, could be taking a nap, could be going to the park and people watching, could be meditating, could be going out and experiencing nature. For me, that's actually the most common way to kind of, get some space and really have some time to reflect on things. I live in Brooklyn. I live right next to a very large park, so I go there and walk there maybe once or twice a day. And nature actually is a really amazing kind of shortcut to de-stressing your brain and activating the default mode network. I did this interview with the science writer Florence Williams, who's really incredible. She wrote this book called The Nature Fix, which is about how nature makes us happier and healthier and more creative. And this is what she told me about kind of the impact of nature on your brain.
When we're outside, our kind of task-oriented brain, our frontal cortex is getting a little bit of a break, just like an overused muscle. When we're inundated by, information, by emails, by our phone, texting and beeping at us all day long, and we have all these tasks to solve one after another, it's fatiguing. Even subconsciously, we get like a little bit grumpy, perhaps. And when we're outside, just that stimulation really slows down. That frontal cortex can get a break. And then when we go back to these cognitive tasks, we're just refreshed and we're sharper.
And Florence is talking explicitly about nature in that particular clip, but I think that that's a really good metaphor for sort of why we need white space in general, because we're operating this modality where we're kind of, constantly overscheduled, constantly rushing from some one thing to the next, and so we're using that task-oriented brain, that frontal cortex, just like again and again and again, right? It's like doing like reps and reps and reps and reps, right? And you need to kind of give that muscle a break in order to then be able to kind of use it again more fully and in a more focused way. So that's a couple ideas for just kind of like activities you can think about to kind of, create some white space for you. But then the million-dollar question is, right, like how do I even make time to do that in my schedule, right? I'm really busy. I have a lot of different things to do. So I want to give you guys kind of 3 quick tips on just sort of designing for white space in your schedule. And the first one is to get better at saying no. And that's not the full tip, don't worry. You're like, yeah, get better at saying no. Like, wouldn't that be great, I actually have like a literal way that you can get better at saying no, which is shifting from saying, I can't do that, to saying, it's actually not won't, that's wrong. I messed up that slide. It's I don't do that. So it's the difference between saying, I can't check email on Saturdays, I don't check email on Saturdays. Or it's the difference between saying, I can't skip my gym workout, and versus I don't skip my gym workout. And this is actually based on a study that was done. They looked at what helped people stick to resolutions that they made, and they found that when they shifted their language, when they shift from saying, I can't skip my gym workout to I don't skip my gym workout, they were actually much more effective at sticking to their resolutions. And the kind of thinking goes that, when you say that you can't do something, it sort of implies that you could do it, but in this particular case, you're choosing not to. But maybe under different circumstances, at a different time, you might be willing to do it. Whereas when you say you don't do something, it sort of implies that you're sticking to a rule, right, or a sort of hard and fast principle. So obviously in this case, sort of gym workout, that's kind of self-talk, right? So it works and it helps you stick to resolutions when you're talking to yourself. But I also find it's helpful as well in sort of external conversations. And I've really made this shift, particularly when I decline things via email. And I find that it does feel sort of much more powerful and kind of definitive when you say no. And it also makes you sort of think about your criteria a little bit, right? If you're saying, I don't do that, it's sort of like, well, why don't you do that? And you kind of the reason comes along with that language. So that's kind of one little tip for getting a little bit better at saying no. The second idea is to make a stop doing list. So we all make to-do lists, right? Very common activity. I really love making a stop doing list. And that's this idea that I got from Jim Collins, who's this best-selling business author. He's written books like Built to Last, Good to Great, a bunch of other best-selling books. You don't need to do it daily. We're talking about something you sit down and do every 6 months, maybe once a year. And what you do is you kind of sit down and you really think about, okay, what are the few things, just a short list of things that are really, having a big drag on my time and on my attention. And are there a few things like that that I might be able to sort of prune away and really regain a lot of times? Activities that you're doing but that are maybe not really providing very much value to you, and you just kind of get caught up in them, and then maybe you reflect and realize, that responding to X type of customer email is sucking up a lot of my time, and I'm going to create, an automatic reply or something like that. I did a blog post about this a while ago, some of the stuff that I stopped doing, some of my list. I don't schedule meetings in the morning because it's very interruptive for me in terms of creative work. I don't treat emails from people I don't know as urgent, which is just like such a great stress reliever. I don't look at social media until the afternoon and then only on breaks. So some of those might give you some ideas, but it's really about just kind of looking at those things that are really big drag on your time and attention, making a short list of a couple things you think maybe you can kind of prune away, and maybe even writing it down, kind of putting it next to your desk in your line of sight, so you're kind of reminded of it. And then the third one is an experiment that I like to call delete yourself. Some of you may be familiar with this program.
3 words for you. Treat yourself. Treat yourself 2011.
So that's the inspiration. And a delete yourself is kind of like a reverse treat yourself. So basically you delete the 4 most frequently used apps on your phone for a week and treat yourself to all the extra time that that's going to provide you with. And just seeing how much space that opens up for you. You know, what if you take Twitter off your phone? What if you take Instagram off your phone? What if you take Slack off your phone? Like, what is going to happen to your life? How much space does that open up? And then do you have some, kind of time for this kind of mind wandering, just have some downtime when you're not going to be kind of constantly occupied with the stuff that's percolating up from these apps. So that's kind of 3, little ideas of things that you guys can experiment with. But if you only take away really kind of one idea from this talk, I want it to be that we kind of live in this world, right, that's filled with distractions. We're constantly overwhelmed. We're constantly overscheduled. And in that environment, I really believe that in many ways, productivity is actually about what you don't do. And when you start saying no, and when you start setting boundaries, and when you give yourself a few minutes to pause, give yourself time to go for a walk, give yourself time to let your mind wander, you start to create space, to open up space for your creativity. And when you have those moments of space in your day, and then you come back to your desk, right, and then you dive back into your schedule, you can actually come back refreshed, and you can bring your full attention and energy, right, to the problem that you're trying to solve. And that's when really amazing things start to happen. And that's when you can really start to create really amazing things. And I want to leave you with this meditation from a recent interview that I did with the designer Craig Mod for the podcast. And so that you guys can kind of focus your full attention on what you're hearing, I'd like to ask you to close your eyes as we listen. It's only about a minute long.
I think that a life in which you are never present, in which you have no control over your attention, in which you're constantly being pulled in different directions, is sort of sad, because there is this incredible gift of consciousness. And when that consciousness is deployed smartly, it's amazing the things that can be built out of it. One of the most amazing structures I've ever seen is the Large Hadron Collider over at CERN. I did a little project with them 3 years ago, and I got to go see it. I got to go into it. And you look at an object like that, and you just go, yeah, no, this object is the result of so much concerted attention and dedication to getting this thing made. There were 100 million moments where someone could have said, let's not do this. And when you see it finally finished, and when you realize that it's just a giant slingshot, it's kind of amazing, right? It's just this giant slingshot, like crash test dummy machine for particles. You go, God, this feels like the most religious object I've ever seen, because it's such a product of what we are capable of as humans when our attention is deployed in beautiful and curious ways.
So we're kind of coming back to the theme of curiosity here, and I want you guys to remember what you're capable of when your attention is deployed in beautiful and curious ways. And hopefully I've given a few kind of ideas for some ways to create the time and space for you to do that. Thank you.